History is more than dates and facts. It's a living tapestry of human experiences. Join me tonight as we unravel its threads and escape into a world long gone. The lamps flicker low, casting warm puddles of light over polished stone. A breeze stirs a veil in the distance, and the faint scent of rosewater mingles with jasmine as you pad quietly down a long, hushed corridor. You're not supposed to be here. Your presence is an impossibility, really. But tonight, no one is watching. Tonight, you slip past the silken doors and into the most secretive corner of the Ottoman Empire, the Imperial Harem. A phrase that conjures up intrigue, opulence, mystery, and let's be honest, a fair amount of misunderstanding. In reality, it was less an erotic paradise and more a highly organized, politically charged, and bizarrely bureaucratic world within a world. With strict routines, coded social ladders, and yes, a truly mind-blowing quantity of embroidered slippers, you're about to witness the heart of the Ottoman court, but also its most fragile and dangerous space. And just to be clear, you probably wouldn't survive this in real life. Just being caught here would mean a very short walk and a very tall tower. But for tonight, don't worry. There's no bowstring waiting, only velvet cushions and soft footsteps. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, post your location and local time. I love seeing where you're listening from. Wherever you are, I hope tonight brings you rest, comfort, and maybe a curious dream or two. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through the carved doors of Topkapi Palace and straight into its hidden pulse. No trumpets, no announcements. Just a muffled hush and an overwhelming sense of stillness. The harem was never loud. That would break its carefully spun spell. What you notice first is the stillness of the air. It's heavy but not oppressive, layered with incense-simmered spices and rose oil. Sunlight filters through intricately carved wooden screens called mashrabia, dotting the marble with dappled shadow like the inside of a jewelry box. Everything gleams. The architecture itself is an exercise in contradiction, wide-open spaces designed to feel intimate. Corridors narrow as you move inward, ceilings rise and then suddenly fall again, creating a gentle claustrophobia meant to protect privacy. Or enforce it. Depends on your perspective. The floors are smooth, worn by centuries of embroidered slippers, and your feet make no sound as you move. You pass a shallow fountain that bubbles softly, not so much for drinking, but to mask voices. Yes, even the water here was trained to be discreet. This was not some isolated chamber tucked in the back of the palace. The harem was a full quarter of the entire Topkapi complex, over 300 rooms at its height. A city within a city, and yet to the outer world it remained a phantom space. Male courtiers spoke of it in hushed tones. Foreigners guessed at it with wild imagination. But you're here now. The title harem comes from the Arabic haram, meaning forbidden or sacred. And that dual meaning is important. It was both sanctuary and prison. Women came here as captives or as tributes from distant provinces. They were trained, ranked, renamed, and in rare cases elevated to unimaginable power. Tonight you catch a glimpse of them. First, just a few dressed in soft yellows and coral silks, gliding past with trays of sweets, trays of coffee, trays of letters they're pretending not to read. They don't see you, or they pretend not to. You step deeper and sense the pulse of the space. The youngest girls live farthest inside near the training halls. The more senior women live closer to the Valid Sultan, who we'll meet later, and the Sultan's own chambers. Here, too, live hundreds of servants, caretakers, midwives, musicians, calligraphers, and cooks. The harem wasn't just full of concubines, it was a social and political institution. overseen with the same detail and formality as any other branch of government. There were ledgers, rolls, duty rosters, allowances, punishments. You didn't just live in the harem, you clocked in. Odd fact, each concubine had a title, not a name. That's how bureaucratic it got. Names implied personhood. Titles were easier to manage. One woman might be the second Kalfa of the Fifth Corridor, another chief needleworker of the Peach Wing. Poetic, but sterile. The air feels quieter now. You've wandered into a sitting room tiled in Iznik blue with gold-leafed verses curling along the edges of the dome above. A cat naps under a carved bench. Yes, cats were allowed in the harem. Sometimes they were the only ones truly free. Historians still argue whether the average concubine ever saw the Sultan at all. Most spent their entire lives here without so much as a glimpse. But that didn't mean they weren't preparing every day for that one just-in-case moment. Of course not, everything was mysterious. Some records survived, like the 17th century daily schedule of the harem kitchen. Spoiler breakfast was opulent with saffron rice quince jam and clotted cream. Also 42 trays of baklava. You heard me? 42 trays. But meals were eaten in silence, often alone, and served according to strict rank. One wrong bite, one wrong look, and a woman could be demoted back to laundry duty, or worse, sent away entirely. You didn't age gracefully in the harem. You expired like old perfume. Yet within all this elegance and tension, women found ways to thrive. Friendships formed, schemes hatched. Songs were shared between walls. Somewhere in the palace, someone's embroidering a handkerchief with a secret message. Someone else is sending it out with the laundry. It's all soft power and silk gloves. And as you sit for a moment beside the fountain, listening to its constant whisper, you feel something curious. Not fear, not desire, but awe. Not at the luxury, but at the centuries of stories that unfolded silently in rooms like these. They still echo. If you're quiet enough, you can almost hear them. You shift slightly where you sit, and the sound of your movement vanishes instantly into the thick rugs and the thicker silence. There's something about the hush in this place that feels rehearsed like a play with no script, but all the cues. You follow the corridor again, tracing faint sandalwood footprints that don't exist, and arrive at a doorway manned by someone who absolutely does. He stands motionless tall, dark-robed with a sash of silk and a look that suggests he hasn't blinked since last Ramadan. This is no ordinary palace servant. This is a black eunuch of the imperial harem. They were the threshold, the human gates. If you imagine the harem as a nested puzzle box of secrets and silk, these were the keys. Or the locks. Depending on how charitable you're feeling, the eunuchs of the Ottoman harem were almost exclusively black Africans, castrated before puberty, and trained from a young age for imperial service. Before you flinch, yes, it's horrifying. And no, it wasn't rare. In fact, it was disturbingly systemic, with routes through Sudan, Abyssinia, and Upper Egypt, feeding this institution for centuries. And yet within this horror, some of these men became powerful. Not just doorkeepers, but power brokers. The chief black eunuch, known as the Qizlar Asi, was one of the most politically influential figures in the empire, often acting as a whisper bridge between the Valid Sultan, the Sultan himself, and the viziers beyond. Historians still argue whether the Qizlar Asa truly had veto power over certain appointments. But what's clear is that he could make or unmake a concubine's future with the single glance, or with a subtle delay in delivering a message. Tonight, you're lucky. You're invisible. The eunuch doesn't stop you, he doesn't even blink, and so you slip past into a space few ever dared describe. This is the courtyard of the black eunuchs, an enclosed high-walled space just before the main entrance of the harem proper. It's not decorated like the rest of the palace, no delicate tile work or calligraphy here. It's functional, controlled, quiet, but the walls here have seen everything. A ledger on a side table details arrival rosters, dates, provinces, physical descriptions. Imagine being reduced to medium-height, fair-skinned musical voice. That was your identity, recorded by a eunuch who had memorized 1,000 faces and would never forget yours. The eunuchs were more than guards. They were mentors, jailers, couriers, sometimes even educators. Some learned enough poetry to instruct the young girls in manners. Others trained in law and logistics, managing the flow of goods and the distribution of gifts. Every letter, every invitation, every cough within the harem passed through their hands. But they also had their own stories. You hear one now carried faintly on the air, a tale of Mehmed the Silent, a eunuch who never spoke above a whisper, but allegedly uncovered a plot to poison the Valid Sultan's favorite concubine. He didn't report it. He arranged a different fate, a midnight reassignment to the laundry wing. Less lethal, equally humiliating. Poetry in action. Another story swirls around Yusuf the Tall, who kept a secret pet monkey in his chambers and trained it to deliver messages between rooms when the official channels got too monitored. The monkey eventually escaped and stole the Valide's ruby ring. True, maybe. Probably not. Delightful, absolutely. Quieter moments exist too. The eunuchs had a prayer room of their own hidden deep in the corner of the harem. You sneak in for a moment and find small carpet still rolled in the corner and a pair of shoes turned perfectly outward. Someone respected ritual even if their life was structured around the absence of one thing most men took for granted. There's a tension in their presence. On the one hand, they were the protectors of the women. On the other, they were their wardens. How each eunuch navigated that tightrope determined whether he became feared, beloved, or replaced. By the mid-17th century, there were over 200 eunuchs serving the harem. And yes, they had a hierarchy of their own, complete with ranks, uniforms, and ceremonial duties. One even kept the record of who wore which perfume. Think of him as the sommelier of scent, because apparently that was the thing. Oh, and a fun fringe tidbit, the eunuch's quarters had the best acoustics in the palace. Not for eavesdropping, although you can imagine the temptation, but because the marble design accidentally created a chamber that carried whispers like violin strings. They discovered this accidentally and used it to practice their own version of opera late at night. Not for performance, just for themselves, outside a bell chimes once. It's not a warning, it's a timing cue. In the harem, almost everything runs by schedule. Meals, baths, classes, prayers, even emotions are on a clock here. A group of eunuchs passes by silently, each with a tray. Sweets, letters, ink. One holds a bundle of freshly dyed silk that smells faintly of cinnamon. Another balances a caged bird presumably destined for some favored concubine's garden room. The bird stares at you with the bored disdain of someone who's seen empires rise and fall and still doesn't get extra millet. You let them pass and once again you're alone. But not quite. There's something about this courtyard. It isn't dramatic. It isn't gold-plated or perfumed. But it holds the weight of every secret that passed through the harem. A place of neither male nor female, neither free nor enslaved. A living liminal space as fragile and sharp as glass. You stand there a little longer, absorbing the quiet until even the whisper of footsteps disappears, and you're left with just the trickle of the courtyard fountain. You take one last look at the entry behind you, the place you entered from, and realize you've crossed a boundary not meant to be crossed. Too late now. You're in. You follow the scent of cardamom and rosewater deeper into the maze, the corridor narrowing, and then suddenly blooming into a vast domed chamber. Light pours in from high stained glass windows, smearing the floor with patches of crimson and blue like a mosaic made of water. And here at last you see them, the women of the harem. They move like breath, soft, sure, precise. Not silent exactly, but studied in their grace. Silk whispers against silk. Anklets chime. Their eyes flick toward you and then away again, not because they're shy, but because in this world, attention is a currency more valuable than gold. You've arrived in the hall of the concubines, the heart of daily life in the harem. It's a communal space ringed with curtained alcoves, padded benches, and silver trays loaded with dried fruit sherbet and elaborate sweets that defy logic and dental health. Some women lounge, others embroider, and a few practice oud melodies on instruments older than some dynasties. Here's the surprise: it's not all decadence and perfume. Sure, there's a degree of luxury, plush cushions, latticed, light more layers of silk than a museum exhibit. But this isn't some floating dreamscape. It's a workplace, a hierarchy, and it's fiercely competitive. At its peak, the Ottoman harem could house anywhere between 300 to 200 women. And they weren't lounging all day. They had ranks duties shifts. There were odalisks, the newcomers, Kalfa experienced women, and Usta the masters, yes, like actual job titles. Some taught dance. Others organized wardrobe. A few were responsible for keeping track of who borrowed which book from the harem's private library. Yes, they had one. No, you couldn't just take the poetry of Hafiz without signing for it. There's a smell in the air, burned sugar and saffron. Someone's been making lakma, tiny fried dough balls soaked in syrup and served only on name days or celebration evenings. You float past, drawn by the laughter of a small group of girls crowded around a board game carved from mother of pearl. Not chess exactly, more like a fusion of mangala and palace gossip. One girl wins and raises her eyebrows smugly. The loser sent back to laundry duty. You think she's joking, you're not sure. Quirky tidbit: some concubines developed secret sign languages using fans' handkerchiefs and even embroidered slipper colors. Lavender with gold trim. I'm bored, let's gossip. Green tassels, the valides watching. It was like Instagram stories, but slower and somehow more lethal. There's an order to all of it. The younger concubines sleep in shared dormitories deeper in the complex. As they gain favor or survive long enough, they're promoted to private rooms closer to the Sultan's wing. But don't get excited, many never make it that far. A girl could spend 30 years embroidering royal linens and never once glimpse the face of the man whose house she technically lives in. Historians still argue whether some of the women preferred this to serve quietly, avoid attention, and retire peacefully with a pension. Others, however, played the long game. Charm, wit, talent, luck, and the occasional accidental bump into a corridor the Sultan might just be passing through. Nothing was unplanned here. Even spontaneity had a choreography. Near one of the pillars stands a quiet girl with a book open in her lap. She's reading aloud not to herself, but for the benefit of a small circle of listeners. Her voice is calm, melodic. She's reading from the Masnavi, a collection of Sufi poetry. It's about divine love, but also, if you squint, about court politics. Everything in the harem is a metaphor for something else. A gray parrot on a perch interrupts her by shrieking a rather inappropriate proverb. The girls giggle. Apparently, the bird belonged to a former concubine who trained it to curse in 4 languages. He's still here. Probably has tenure. Another unusual tradition: dreams. Concubines kept dream journals, often illustrated. a record of the night's wandering mind which could then be interpreted by a special dream reader in the morning. Had a dream about drowning in rose petals might mean fortune, or heartbreak, or that you're allergic to floral soap. Interpretations varied wildly. You moved toward a wall lined with tiny drawers, inside each one trinkets, hairpins, letters, dried flowers, a communal memory chest. If a woman left or died, her favorite belongings would be kept here for a while. Not officially, of course, but the other women made space for ghosts in their own quiet ways. A young girl runs past you chased by an older one who's half scolding, half laughing. "Don't trip on your own embroidery," she calls out. You realize this isn't just a place of confinement. It's also a childhood, a school, a sisterhood, even a home. But it's fragile, deeply so. One mistake, a single misspoken word, or a moment of uninvited eye contact, and everything could change. The hierarchy here is more volatile than politics outside the palace walls, and that's saying something. The walls themselves feel like they're listening. You pause before a panel of Iznik tile, blue and white, flowering with intricate calligraphy. One tile in the corner is cracked just slightly. Legend says it shattered during an earthquake, but no one ever repaired it. A reminder that even in this perfectly constructed world, imperfection had its place. A bell rings again, higher this time. Afternoon prayers. The girls begin to disperse in small groups, pulling veils forward, slipping books back into satchels. The parrot sighs loudly. You step back unnoticed once more. But now you carry the knowledge that behind all the fantasy and scandalized Western imagination, this hall was a hive of human complexity, a living, breathing ecosystem of ambition, boredom, beauty, faith, and fierce intelligence. One girl passes close to you and you catch the scent of cardamom and clove from her perfume. She doesn't look at you, but she hums as she walks. A lullaby, a warning, a song she heard from her grandmother far across the sea. You'll never know. And somehow that makes it even more real. You find yourself drifting past the tiled walls and thick velvet curtains deeper into the folds of the harem, toward a quieter, darker wing. The buzz of conversation fades. The air changes. You're walking into a story that doesn't belong to just one woman, but to hundreds who once dared to hope they'd be noticed. This is where the newcomers live. Fresh arrivals, often very young, almost always foreign, brought to the palace through conquest tribute or the complex politics of the slave trade. You pass a long corridor lined with narrow doors behind which lives begin again with new names, new clothes, new futures. And tonight you're going to follow one of them. You hear her before you see her, a song tentative in a language that doesn't belong here. Slavic, maybe, or Circassian. She sings to herself in the dark, perched at the edge of a narrow bed. Her real name is gone, given up like a coat at the door. She's now called Dilruba, the heart stealer. It's a name they gave her. She did not choose it. She's maybe 16 and terrified. Her first days were a blur, taken from a border village, paraded before officials, examined, weighed, renamed. She was told she was lucky. Some version of that anyway. Lucky to be here. Lucky to be chosen. Lucky to have her future dictated with embroidery needles and forced smiles. But here's the thing. Dilruba is smart. She watches. She listens. She learns quickly who to avoid and who can be trusted. The old Kolfa with a limp who teaches the rules through whispered insults. The girl from Alexandria who braids hair like a miracle. The quiet one with the stutter who knows how to make a coffee strong enough to impress even the Valide Sultan. Training begins immediately. Language lessons. Ottoman Turkish, then Persian and Arabic if she shows promise. Court etiquette. poetry, dance, music, calligraphy, how to walk, how to bow, how to sit just far enough from the Sultan to be noticed but not scolded. Historians still argue whether all this training was truly for the Sultan's benefit, or whether it was a form of elite containment, a way to cultivate potential threats in velvet prisons. Regardless, Dilruba learns fast, and she is beautiful. But beauty alone means nothing here. Every girl is beautiful, some of them almost cruelly so. What matters more is presence, wit, timing, the ability to read a room before you enter it, the ability to leave just enough mystery to be remembered. One day, she's assigned to serve coffee to one of the Sultan's lower consorts. It's a test, clearly. She holds the cup with two hands, keeps her gaze low, walks in silence, each step practiced. The cup doesn't tremble. The foam is perfect. She passes. She's moved to a slightly better room. Not private, but closer to the warmest wing. Her food improves rice with saffron, not just barley. She's permitted to use rose oil in her bath. It's progress. And in the harem, progress is survival. But even in ascent, there are risks. Rivalries form quickly. The girl from Venice smiles too much. The one from Crimea has a suspiciously close bond with a eunuch. Whispers travel faster than letters here. One accusation, one rumor, and your embroidery needle becomes your cage. Dilruba learns the dance of indirect warfare. She offers compliments like olive branches but never lowers her guard. She shares a scarf with the jealous one, knowing it's poisoned metaphorically. Emotionally. No one dies, but someone cries. And that's enough. Fringe tidbits: some concubines were trained in shadow puppetry. Not just as entertainment, but as subtle political commentary. Imagine Dilruba weeks later performing a puppet tale about a clever fox who outwits jealous snakes. Everyone laughs, no one forgets. Another quirk mirrors. They were rare and precious. The girls had to earn time with the full-length bronze mirrors stored in the dressing halls. Being granted mirror time meant status, recognition, a moment to see yourself not as property but as possibility. Then comes the real test, a summons. She's not told why. No one ever is. She's given a robe of gold-threaded silk and perfumed until she can barely breathe. Her hands are henna'd, her lips brushed with carmine. She is walked, escorted really down a corridor lit only by hanging oil lamps. At the end, a room with no windows, just candlelight and silence. It may be her night with the Sultan, or it may be a joke. A mistake. A punishment dressed in perfume. She enters, kneels, waits. He doesn't come. The eunuch returns, says nothing, just nods. She's escorted back to her room. Her robe is taken, her perfume scrubbed. It's as if the night never happened. This was normal. Some girls were summoned dozens of times before they were noticed. Others never made it past that first waiting room. A kind of emotional lottery, one ticket. Endless suspense. But Dilruba doesn't cry. She sleeps eventually, her breath, even her hands still dyed with henna. And by morning, she has a plan. Because the goal isn't just one night, it's a son. A son means power, status, a future outside these walls. But that dream lies far ahead. For now, she returns to her lessons. Learns a new poem. Perfects the art of refilling a coffee cup without making a sound. And smiles when the girl from Venice glares at her from across the courtyard. She's not just surviving anymore. She's playing the game. Steam coils in the air like a silk scarf tossed by invisible hands. You blink as the chamber fogs around you, fragrant with orange blossom water eucalyptus, and something earthy, maybe bay leaf, maybe old gossip. Welcome to the bathhouse of the harem. Here everything softens the light, the voices, the edges of secrets. The hammam or imperial bathhouse wasn't just for cleanliness, it was theater, ritual, strategy, and let's be honest, an Olympic event of passive-aggressive stares. This is where alliances were forged, enemies undermined, and the best rose oil treatments were fiercely debated. And not all massages were relaxing, some were emotionally bruising. Today is bath day. Not a rare treat, but part of the routine. You pass through an antechamber where silks lie discarded in careful puddles guarded by attendants called telaks. Most of them are older women, now former concubines, who aged out of favor and transitioned into management, essentially. Picture that one boss who knows everything, remembers everyone's missteps, and always brings it up right when you're shampooing. You follow the sound of gentle splashing into the main chamber, a great domed space tiled in honey and sapphire hues with a central marble platform known as the Gobek Tasha, the belly stone. It's warm to the touch, heated from below by the ancient Roman-inspired furnace system still rumbling somewhere in the depths of the palace. On the stone, women recline like languid cat's towels, wrapped strategically, skin-gleaming faces flushed from heat. Some chat, some sulk, some simply dream. In the corner, a small group whispers in a semicircle around a girl sobbing into a sponge. Apparently, her embroidery was rejected by one of the Sultan's sisters. Tragic. The group offers her honeyed dates and rehearse sympathy. Two of them quietly enjoy her downfall. This is the heart of harem social life. Think of it as high-stakes brunch with steam and secrets. No eunuchs here, this is the women's domain. And while they may appear to be exfoliating, they are very much plotting. Dilruba is here too. She's quieter today, but not unnoticed. Her back is straight, her towel perfect. She answers questions with just enough modesty to sound humble and just enough wit to stay interesting. And she listens. It's through bathhouse chatter that she first hears the name Safiye, a favorite, currently out of favor. Something about a misplaced brooch or a misdelivered note or a suspiciously wilted rose bouquet sent to the wrong wing. In the harem, a flower can be a weapon and a silence can be fatal. Historians still argue whether bathhouse confrontations ever turned physical. Most say no. But there is that one legend completely unproven of a concubine slipping on a soap-slick tile moments after spreading a particularly vicious rumor. Accident said the official record. Justice said everyone else. The attendants are hard to read. Some are loyal, others are spies. Most are both. They speak little, smile less, and never ever drop a towel unless they mean to. You sit quietly in a dry corner, invisible again, watching a moment unfold. One of the older women in Usta clearly approaches a younger girl and begins massaging oil into her hair. It's intimate, careful. And then, as if casually, she whispers a name, Mariam. The girl stiffens, a nod. Message delivered. What does it mean? You'll never know. But it lingers in the air like steam. Fringe tidbits: some bathhouses had acoustically tuned domes built to amplify singing. Women would hum lullabies or fragments of folk songs, and the notes would spiral upward, echoing like ghosts. One girl hums now a soft Andalusian melody, sweet and sharp like pomegranate seeds. And speaking of music, there were bathhouse games. One involved guessing spices blindfolded. Another involved composing impromptu verses to tease the other girls. Winners earned extra fruit or an embroidered towel. Losers, usually just mild humiliation, or a scolding from the Kalfa who took poetry very seriously. The heat intensifies. A girl dozes. Another sketches shapes into the condensation on the marble. A third plucks petals from a basin and lines them up by size. Nothing is wasted here, not time, not beauty, not chance. Dilruba finally speaks. Just a joke about perfume or towels or someone's tragic attempt at a love poem. The others laugh, not all of them, but enough. She's climbing again. This bathhouse has no clocks, but time passes. Eventually, a gong sounds softly from far away, calling the women back to their rooms, back to structure. Robes are gathered, hair is braided damp. Someone leaves behind a ring hidden in a soap dish. A message, a mistake. Again, you'll never know. As the women file out, the attendants begin cleaning, scrubbing stone, refilling oils, whispering among themselves. They know more than anyone, and say less than everyone. You linger a moment longer, inhaling the last breath of warmth before it fades. And you realize the bathhouse isn't just where women clean their bodies. It's where they tried to cleanse their hopes, their fear, their doubt, and occasionally their competition. You step into the corridor again, cooler now, with droplets still clinging to your sleeves. Behind you, laughter fades, water drains, and tomorrow's drama brews silently in scented steam. The warmth of the bath still clings faintly to your skin as you wander down a gently sloping hallway, the air cooling the color palette, shifting from bright tilework to softer, richer tones, deep plum dark cedar muted gold. You're approaching the core of the harem's invisible orbit. You are about to meet the real ruler of this world. Not the Sultan, the Valide Sultan, mother of the reigning Sultan, mistress of the harem, power broker, kingmaker, keeper of both traditions and grudges. If the harem were a solar system, she would be the sun around which every slippered planet revolved. Her chambers are different from the others. They don't scream wealth, but they radiate authority. The fabrics are heavier, the scents darker oud and clove with none of the sweet florals the concubines favor. And there's an eerie stillness here. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that watches you even after you leave. She's not in the room right now, which is just as well. You wouldn't survive eye contact. The Valide Sultan held enormous power in the Ottoman court, especially during the period historians call the Kadınlar Saltanatı, or Reign of Women, when the mothers of sultans practically ran the empire from behind a lattice screen. Orders from the Valide carried the same weight as the sultan's, and her word within the harem was final. Final as in your bath privileges are gone, or your belongings have been moved to the Palace of Tears. It's said the Valide Sultan could make or break a concubine's career with a simple tilt of her head. She wasn't just a mother, she was an institution. She received ambassadors. She managed vast personal estates. She had her own court, her own income, her own seal. She was not to be trifled with, which is exactly why everyone did. Quietly, you pause before an enormous tapestry on her wall. It depicts the tugra, the calligraphic signature of the Sultan, surrounded by floral motifs and more subtly cranes. Cranes symbolized watchfulness. They sleep with one eye open, like her. Suddenly the curtain parts. She enters. No trumpets. No dramatic gasps. Just the faint rustle of brocade, a scent of sandalwood, and a presence that fills the room before her body does. She is older than you expected, sharper, not frail, but carved like someone who has sat through centuries of candlelight and survived. She doesn't see you, or perhaps she does and chooses not to care. That's worse somehow. She settles into a low divan surrounded by papers and attendants. A tray arrives, coffee unsweetened, a sign of strength, and a bowl of figs sliced precisely skin side up. She takes one bite, then speaks. Her voice is low. Not loud enough to carry far, but firm enough to carry weight. She asks about repairs to the gardens, a missing earring, a letter from the Grand Vizier's wife. All while barely lifting her eyes, Dilruba enters summoned by a eunuch. She kneels not fully, just low enough to show respect without desperation. The valide regards her for a long moment, then gestures to the embroidery in Dilruba's hands. It's good. Very good. The stitches are perfect, the colors dignified, the calligraphy accurate. The valide says nothing, just nods once. That nod will echo through Dilruba's life like a drumbeat. The visit lasts 6 minutes. The message it sends will last 6 months. Historians still argue whether the Valide Sultan interfered directly in the Sultan's romantic choices. Officially, she didn't. Unofficially, she curated the entire casting process like a Broadway producer. She knew who flattered, who lied, who schemed, and she had her own spies made scribes, even musicians. Fringe fact 1. Valide Sultan kept a notebook of dream interpretations and used it to determine which concubines were spiritually aligned with the Sultan's destiny. Another required every girl to submit a weekly written reflection on a proverb. A silent woman is gold caused several nervous breakdowns. There's a portrait of the valide on a small lacquered stand, an earlier version of herself painted in vivid oils. Her eyes haven't changed. They're not cruel, just deeply, profoundly unimpressed. One of her aides approaches with a petition. She signs it without looking. Her hand is steady. You realize this woman has written more decrees than the Sultan himself. Her handwriting is flawless. She is the spider at the center of this glittering web. But she wasn't born to it. Most Valide sultans began as concubines. Like Dilruba, like all of them. They rose through charm, through cunning, and through the single most valuable political achievement possible in the Ottoman world, giving birth to a male heir. And surviving long enough for that son to become sultan. No easy feat. You glance around the room. No weapons here. No obvious defenses. Just velvet incense and the terrifying certainty that everything you say will be remembered. Outside, you hear a musician tuning a canon, a type of zither. The valide listens for a moment, then requests a specific song. A lullaby, ironically. One she used to sing to the current sultan, before he had a beard, before he had enemies, before he forgot to visit. She doesn't say that last part. She doesn't have to. She lifts her coffee, sips, eyes closed. The room exhales with her. And you've forgotten but still breathing retreat. She'll remain there for hours behind the veil of lace and law, planning, remembering, calculating. Watching her empire of women shift, rise, and fracture beneath her gentle, impossible control. And somewhere far below, Dilruba walks away from the audience, heart-racing robe, clutch smile perfectly neutral. She's been seen, and nothing will ever be the same again. You drift now into a quieter wing of the harem, a little alcove tucked behind a pair of ornate cedarwood doors. The light is lower here, shaded by thick curtains embroidered with verses from the Quran in delicate gold thread. This isn't a place for silk dances or whispered gossip. This is a place for study. Unseen by most, the women of the harem spent hours every day in structured lessons. Language, literature, music, philosophy, religious study, arithmetic, history. And not just surface-level skimming. These women could quote Hafiz and Rumi and argue over whether the Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun really was the foundation of sociology or just a long letter to his pen pal. Yes, you've entered the harem's schoolroom. You might expect it to be quiet, but it isn't. It hums with soft discussion quills, scratching parchment, the gentle plucking of strings as one girl struggles with a melody, while another mumbles geometry problems under her breath. If Hogwarts had been founded by Ottoman court ladies, this would be its common room. A woman in her 50s stands at the front, poised, elegant, with the kind of smile that sharpens just a little too much at the edges. She's the Usta Mualima, or master teacher, rumored to have once been a Greek noble, or maybe a former palace favorite. No one knows for sure, but her Arabic calligraphy is lethal and her students adore her. You spot Dilruba here, too. Kneeling on a silk cushion, her eyes locked on a page of Ottoman Turkish prose. Today's task composing a letter as if she were a provincial governor. She writes carefully, each stroke of her reed pen deliberate. Her tongue presses to her cheek in concentration. She's trying to get the tone just right, dignified but not cold, commanding but not arrogant. It's more than an exercise. It's rehearsal for power. Because here's the secret, these lessons weren't just for refinement. They were training for influence. Every concubine, whether she ever saw the Sultan or not, was expected to be capable of grace, wit, and diplomacy. She might one day be the mother of a prince, or the quiet advisor behind a reform, or the woman who convinces the Valide Sultan to shift an alliance with a single well-placed couplet. Historians still argue whether the harem school was formalized, or simply a set of overlapping apprenticeships. Either way, the results were real. Harem women wrote poetry that circulated anonymously in court. Some hosted salons. One even translated philosophical works from Arabic into Turkish under a pseudonym, The Ink of a Hidden Flame. The manuscript still exists, and it's very, very snarky. Fringe tidbit. There were book clubs. Of course there were. One famously debated Kalila wa Dimna, the ancient animal fable collection. A fox, a jackal, and a greedy lion became metaphors for three real women in the room. None of them admitted it, but all of them knew. Another quirk: musical duels. Two girls would be given the same poem and challenged to set it to music by sundown. The winner got a silk handkerchief embroidered with a proverb. The loser had to write a haiku praising the winner's eyebrows. It was a competitive environment. You sit near the back, near a rack of loot cases and stacks of hand-bound notebooks. One volume catches your eye. It's filled with proverbs written in 3 languages. Some are wise, some deeply shady. One simply says, "Even a candle casts 2 shadows." You make a mental note to ponder that one before bed. Today's lesson is interrupted by the entrance of a girl carrying a tray of fruit. Not for snacking today, they're painting. Pomegranates, dates, green figs. The girls gather in clusters, dipping brushes into crushed pigment. It's not about realism, it's about elegance, metaphor, narrative. One paints a pomegranate split down the middle. Another paints a fig tree with golden leaves. Dilruba paints a single grapevine curling around a trellis. The usta pauses behind her and says nothing, just rests a hand gently on her shoulder. It's the most praise anyone gets all day. This is the true education of the harem, not just reading books, but reading people. Learning the art of gesture, of implication, of moving 3 steps ahead while appearing to be 6 behind. Out there in the court, men fight with swords and signatures, and here, women fight with glances and rhyming couplets. And it's no less lethal. As the lesson ends, the students file out quietly, discussing verse forms and the upcoming divan recital. One girl mutters that her ghazal was plagiarized. Another brags that her metaphor for longing a flame licking the edge of a mirror made one of the eunuchs blush. You're the last to leave. The room grows still. The ink dries. The curtains sway with a late breeze. And you understand now this place wasn't just a golden cage. It was also a library, a university, a finishing school for political operatives who happened to wear embroidered slippers. And somewhere down the hallway, Dilruba walks slowly, holding her notebook close, whispering lines of poetry to herself, not just for art, but for survival. The days here are syrupy and slow, thick with repetition and ceremony. You find yourself back in the main halls of the harem, somewhere between a dream and a very elegant waiting room. This is the part of palace life no one outside ever wrote poems about. the part where time just sort of happens. Today you walk through the long gallery that connects the residential wings to the central court. It's late morning, and most of the concubines are busy being, well, not busy. A trio lounges near a lattice screen embroidering the same petal pattern they've stitched 100 times before. Another group is arranging and rearranging a fruit bowl figs pairs and one slightly too ripe quince that keeps rolling away like it has a political opinion. You find Dilruba seated near a carved pillar, bathed in a patch of filtered sunlight. She's reading again, not poetry this time, but recipes. Not that she's cooking, mind you. She's studying which dishes are favored by which members of the palace. Knowledge is leverage. Knowledge is everything. Despite the endless lessons and rituals, the truth is that boredom hovers over the harem like incense smoke. Opulence dulls. Even luxury has its weight. What do you do with 1,000 silk robes when you can't leave the palace? What's the point of mastering 5 dialects if you never hear them spoken outside these walls? And yet there's always something. A new perfume to test? A lute string to restring? A letter to write that may or may not be sent? The harem runs on these small projects like a clockwork machine of purpose, tethered together by sheer will. The women craft elaborate pastimes. There's a group collecting rare feathers from the palace's aviary and turning them into quill pens. Another keeps a secret diary of overheard conversations, each entry coded with symbolic fruit metaphors. The melon is anxious, it reads. You assume the melon is the valide's niece. Or possibly a parrot. Fringe tidbit. The concubines invented a game called the Dance of Cups. It involved balancing small silver bowls on one's head while reciting lines from classical love poems. Fall out a rhythm and you had to confess the name of your secret crush. One girl did it on purpose every time. She was either a romantic or a terrifying strategist. Meanwhile, the kitchen sends up trays of sherbet, a chilled, spiced drink flavored with sour cherries and violets. You try a sip. It's floral sweet and slightly sad. A drink designed by someone who never tasted snow. You learn quickly that hierarchy governs even boredom. The higher-ranked women are allowed more privacy, more access to reading materials, better rooms, and importantly, more mirrors. Mirror time is rationed like chocolate in a boarding school. Dilruba is now allotted 10 extra minutes per week. She's moving up. Historians still argue whether this slow daily rhythm served to dull ambition or sharpen it. Did routine pacify the women, or did it give them space to calculate, to quietly maneuver, to rehearse smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes? There's a room nearby known unofficially as the cushion chamber. No real reason, it just has too many cushions. Floor cushions, back cushions, embroidered ones shaped like pomegranates. It's where the women go to be alone in public, which is a very specific kind of solitude. Dilruba goes there sometimes, not to nap, to watch, to listen. She notices things. Who stops by, who doesn't. Who sighs twice before speaking. Who folds her veil neatly versus who lets it slide off with drama. It's a kind of chess. Except the board is made of velvet and no one ever admits they're playing. A canary sings nearby, caged in silver filigree. One girl whispers that it belonged to a concubine who tried to train it to say the Sultan's name. It didn't work. The bird mostly just chirps figs in a judgmental tone. Still, they keep it as a sort of mascot. Someone passes out almond cookies. Someone else bursts into tears. Someone else pretends to cry louder just to steal the attention. Dilruba raises an eyebrow, then returns to her reading. That's the secret to surviving the slow days, a well-timed detachment. The sun shifts again. A bell chimes somewhere deeper in the palace, probably signaling the afternoon inspection of linens. Yes, even linens are inspected. Everything in the harem has a standard, especially the things no one sees. You step into the far corridor and find a room that seems forgotten. One wall is painted with birds, herons, storks, sparrows flying across stylized waves. Below a low divan is covered in old songbooks. The room smells like lemon oil and something older, maybe memory. Fringe tidbit: one concubine here once composed a lullaby so sad that the Sultan reportedly banned it from being played again. Of course, this made it wildly popular among the other women. They sang it in secret. Still do. You hear a version of it now hummed gently by a girl braiding another's hair. The lyrics are nonsense about a wandering jasmine blossom and a lonely turtle dove, but the tune aches. Even the walls seem to listen. Later, Dilruba meets a servant at the fountain. A brief conversation. No eye contact. Just a folded note passed quickly. It contains a verse. Nothing else. Maybe it's for the Sultan. Maybe for the Valid. Maybe it's a poem meant only for herself. She doesn't say. She just walks away, her face unreadable. And you understand something fundamental about the harem. It is not the grand moments that shape these women. It's not the Sultan's visits or the jeweled gifts or even the whispers of favor. It's the slow drip of days like these. The long stretches of ornamental idleness that make the mind sharper, the ambition quieter, and the emotions more dangerous. You leave the gallery just as the canary chirps again, louder this time. Figs! It might be a warning, or just another echo in a place built from waiting. A sudden tension hums in the air. The usual rhythm of the harem boredom padded in silk has shifted just slightly. Curtains are being fluffed more meticulously. Floors are being scrubbed for the third time today. Someone's practicing a song for the second time in an hour, voice trembling like the string of a canoe strung too tight. Because tonight the Sultan is expected, and that changes everything. You don't see him, not yet. The Sultan is more concept than man in the harem. He appears rarely and only ever when he chooses. But when he might appear, it's as if gravity bends differently. The air thickens with perfume and apprehension. In the preparation chambers, women gather in whispered clusters. Some pretend indifference. Others feign modesty. A few rehearse smiles in mirrors, changing the angle just slightly there, that one with half a dimple. Dilruba sits quietly as two attendants coil her hair into a thick braid, threaded with pearls. She doesn't fidget. She doesn't speak. Her robe is midnight blue embroidered with silver tulips. It's not the flashiest, but it flatters her eyes. And in the harem, subtlety can be louder than sequins. Tonight, like every possible visit, the valid Sultan has made selections. 3 women have been named. They'll be sent to the Has Odasu, the Sultan's private receiving chamber. One of them will be chosen if he arrives. It's like a twisted game of courtly roulette. You might be elevated beyond imagining, or you might just drink cardamom milk, smile politely, and be sent home before midnight, with nothing but a polite nod and the same insomnia you arrived with. Dilruba has been selected. A eunuch delivers the news with a half bow. No ceremony, no reassurance. She rises, adjusting her robe, and walks down the corridor with the grace of someone who has practiced walking like she isn't terrified. Her slippers are new, soft, silent. Her pulse, however, is a kettle drum. The Has Odessa is as beautiful as legend claims. Gold inlaid woodwork, a ceiling that ripples with painted stars, and a single brazier burning oud wood that smells like smoke and stories. The light is soft flames flickering behind colored glass lanterns. The 3 concubines are seated apart, not speaking. It's not forbidden, just ill-advised. Anything said now could echo in the wrong ears, so they wait. The clock in the chamber is subtle, a sand timer flipped quietly by a eunuch. Each grain feels like a judgment. Historians still argue whether the Sultan made his choices purely from desire or whether these visits were more ritual than romance. After all, producing heirs wasn't just personal, it was national policy. But to the women waiting, it doesn't matter. This could be the moment that shifts everything. Dilruba sits with perfect posture. Not stiff, not too relaxed. Her hands rest in her lap. One breath, another. Then, footsteps. Real ones. The doors open and he enters. Not a myth, not a painting. A man, the Sultan. He's younger than expected. Or older. The room doesn't agree, he doesn't speak. He just glances once, twice, and then gestures. It's Dilruba. She stands bows low and follows. That's all the others see. The doors close again, and whatever happens next, they won't speak of it. Not allowed. What does happen, you won't hear the details. No one does. The harem trades in mystery, not memoir. But when she returns, her face is unreadable. She says nothing. Her attendants say nothing. But her robe is folded more carefully than before. Her hair has been rebraided, and her expression has changed just slightly. Power isn't loud. It rarely arrives as trumpets. Sometimes it walks down a corridor, head bowed with nothing but a flicker in the eyes that says, I was chosen. Fringe tidbit after each night spent with the Sultan, a concubine was given a small gift, often a jewel, a silk, or a coin set in a locket. It wasn't compensation, it was recognition, a token that meant you were here. Later that night, back in her chamber, Dilruba opens her gift. It's a silver filigree ring inset with lapis lazuli deep, dark blue flecked with gold like stars frozen in stone. She places it in her jewelry box. Doesn't wear it. Not yet. Because one night with the Sultan is just the beginning. If she's lucky, if fate is on her side, she may conceive. And if she bears a son, everything changes. But for now, she drinks warm milk, brushes her hair out in long, methodical strokes, and says nothing. Somewhere nearby, the canary screeches figs again. Even the birds know when the world has shifted. And you still invisible feel the weight of the room thicken again. Not with tension this time, but with possibility. She's been chosen. The path is opened. And the harem is watching. The garden at dusk feels like another world entirely. You step outside through a narrow archway framed in tiles and carved stone, where thick vines of jasmine cling to the old walls like ancient secrets. The air is cooler now, a welcome relief from the heated intrigue inside. You can almost breathe again. This is the Hasbacha, the Sultan's private garden, and though technically shared by the harem, it's not a public space. It's secluded, designed more for quiet walks, stolen conversations, and the rare, unguarded moment. The gravel path crunches beneath your feet, and the soft chirp of crickets competes gently with the sound of a distant fountain trickling into a marble basin. It's here between twilight and torchlight that the whispers begin. Dilruba walks slowly, her robe trailing just enough to catch dew from the grass. Her fingers toy with the edge of a scarf knotted loosely around her shoulders. She's alone, but not quite. From behind a trellis, a shadow shifts. A low voice murmurs her name. It's not the Sultan, and this is where things get dangerous. Throughout the centuries, the harem garden wasn't just a place for solitude. It was a network of invisible lines between curiosity and conspiracy, between longing and betrayal, between a glance and a rumor that could end lives. Servants wandered through it with purpose, eunuchs watched from balconies, and somewhere, always, someone was listening. The voice belongs to a palace poet, one of the scribes assigned to the Sultan's court. He's young, clever, possibly foolish. He was the one who copied her ghazal into the palace anthology. He's also the one who smuggled back her reply under the guise of returning her ink set. A gift that somehow came with an extra poem folded between blotting sheets. Historians still argue whether such affairs ever truly took place, or whether they were simply the stuff of European novels and Orientalist fantasy. But records do show that several court scribes were mysteriously reassigned to garrisons in the most mosquito-infested corners of the empire. No explanation given, just a polite demotion and a swift departure. Dilruba doesn't say much. She doesn't have to. Her silence speaks volumes. Her gaze lingers just a beat too long. Her hand brushes a fig leaf before letting it go. The boy, he's barely more than that, recites a few lines in a whisper. Something about nightingales and stars and fruit falling before it's ripe. His voice cracks a little. It's either nerves or heartbreak, possibly both. She smiles and then says the most dangerous thing she could say. Don't come again. The tone is gentle but final. He doesn't argue, he disappears into the shadows. Whether he obeys that command, of course, is another matter. Fringe tidbits some concubines cultivated secret flower languages. A red carnation pressed into a book meant, wait for me. A violet left by the bath meant you're being watched. An iris. That one meant it's already too late. There was a whole seasonal calendar of messages with meanings shifting subtly depending on who was watching. You wander deeper into the garden now. The path forks one direction, leading toward the aviary, the other toward the small pavilion, known simply as the listening place. Don't be fooled by the name. It's not about enjoying birdsong. It was built precisely to hear what wasn't meant to be heard. The acoustics were engineered to carry whispers upward into a concealed dome. Untraceable, brilliant, terrifying, and yet the garden endures as a rare place of breath. Near the citrus grove, two older concubines share a quiet moment. One peels a tangerine with expert care, the rind spiraling into the grass like a ribbon. The other fans herself with a folded page of poetry. They don't speak. They don't need to. Their bodies say they've seen many girls like Dilruba rise. Some fell just as quickly. Some burned too brightly, some vanished. A cat pads past. You've seen her before, golden-eyed with a chipped ear and a reputation for catching mice and secrets. Some girls feed her honey-dipped dates. Others swear she's a bad omen. But she's always here near the edge of where things blur. Dilruba returns to the fountain at the garden's center, a mosaic-bottomed basin reflecting the sky's lavender hues. She sits there a moment, perfectly still. Her fingers trace the rim. She thinks of the boy, of the Sultan, of the endless rows of curtains and corridors and customs waiting for her tomorrow. And she lets herself sigh just once. Fringe Fact 1. Valide Sultan commissioned a new species of rose to be bred here trained to bloom only at night. She named it Mercy, though no one could say if that was irony or nostalgia. The light deepens. Lanterns are lit small globes of amber fire flickering to life one by one along the paths. The garden shifts from a place of possibility to one of memory. Night settles like a cloak. You move to leave, glancing back at Dilruba one last time. She hasn't moved. The ring is still in her jewelry box. Her scarf still clings to her shoulders. But something is different now. Because in the harem, even a garden visit can be political. And one quiet warning, don't come again, can echo louder than a trumpet call. The garden listens. It always has. Morning drapes itself over the harem like a sheer veil, quiet and golden. A servant draws open a lattice screen, letting in a shaft of sunlight that lands squarely on the edge of a low bed. Dilruba is already awake. She hasn't slept much, because something is different. She places a hand gently on her abdomen. It's nothing, maybe, or maybe everything. Weeks have passed since her night with the Sultan. The court has moved on. Lessons continue. Gossip winds through the halls like incense. The canary has learned a new word scandal and uses it with unnerving precision. But Dilruba has noticed things. A craving for figs, averted eyes from her fellow concubines, a eunuch who now nods just a little more respectfully. She's not sure yet, but others are. In the harem, pregnancy is less about motherhood and more about destiny. If she's carrying the Sultan's child, and especially if that child is male, her entire life will change. Her rank will skyrocket. She will be protected, watched, worshipped, and envied. But first, it must be confirmed. She's taken discreetly to the palace physician, a woman known only as Nurbanu Hanum. White-haired, kind-eyed, terrifying in her accuracy. She asks no questions. She examines, notes, nods. Possibly, she says. Likely. That's all Dilruba gets, but it's enough. The whispers begin the next day. Not from her, of course. She tells no one. But in the harem, silence is an invitation. A slight delay in her walking pace. A second helping of honeyed rice. A maid spotted adjusting her bedding with too much care. These things speak louder than any announcement. Historians still argue whether harem pregnancies were carefully timed and tracked, or left to luck and divine will. The truth is both. Rituals abounded, scented oils, protective amulets, prayers scribbled onto parchment and sewn into silk cushions. Some women drank sherbet made with crushed pearls. Others refused anything red just in case. Dilruba does none of that. She just waits until one morning she's summoned by the Valid Sultan. Again, this time there's no embroidery to show, no poetry to recite, just presence. She bows. The Valide regards her for a long time. Then, with astonishing gentleness, places a hand on her cheek. No words. Just that. The meaning is clear. She's been recognized. And just like that, her status shifts. She is now a Haseki, a favored consort. She is given a private chamber, her own attendants, better food, more privacy. Her time in the schoolroom ends. Her laundry is folded by others now. She doesn't carry trays anymore. But this elevation is not a cushion. It is a spotlight. And it is not without consequence. A rival concubine, Safiye, who once held the Sultan's favor, accidentally knocks over a brazier during breakfast. Embers catch the edge of a silk veil. No one is hurt, but a message is sent. Another rival suddenly falls ill. Stomach pain, fever, no known cause. The kitchen is inspected. The steward questioned. A eunuch disappears the next morning. Fringe tidbit Ottoman superstition dictated that pregnant concubines avoid looking at mirrors during eclipses, lest their child be born with moon-shadowed eyes. Whether that's true or not, the next eclipse is 3 nights from now, and Dilruba's mirror has been turned to face the wall. Every morning her chamber is checked for omens, strange scents, loose tiles, a broken feather. Every evening she is given pomegranate syrup in warmed milk. To fortify the womb, they say, or to soothe the nerves, or perhaps just tradition. She dreams often now, vivid dreams. In one, she is in a garden of glass trees, each fruit reflecting her face back at her, but slightly older. In another, she walks a long hallway while unseen voices whisper verses from the Quran, some real, some invented. She records them all. The Valide's dream reader receives them, says little, but begins bringing her extra blankets. And then it's confirmed. The physician smiles. You will have a child, she says. She doesn't say a son, not yet. But the court begins to prepare as if it already knows. A new wing is readied, a midwife brought in from Adirna, famous for delivering twins without a single drop of wine. This is considered legendary. Amulets are sewn into the mattress. Perfumed water is sprayed along the doorframe. Dilruba receives gifts from across the empire. Silks from Bursa, almonds from Damascus, a set of carved wooden animals from the daughter of a vizier, as if the child were already born. The Valide visits once more. This time she stays longer. Be still, she says. Not as a command, as a wish. Fringe fact: a pregnant concubine would sometimes be assigned a eunuch storyteller to read to her daily to keep her calm. One was known for inventing tales about cats who ran palaces in secret and performed covert diplomacy. That eunuch was eventually reassigned after a particularly pointed allegory. Dilruba's days blur into soft, light, warm baths, careful meals. She's not bored, she's alert. Always alert. Because now everything matters. Every glance, every sigh, every dream. Because somewhere inside her a future sultan may be growing. And everyone knows it. The child is born at dawn. There are no trumpets, no public announcements, no official scrolls read at the gates. Just the hush of slippered footsteps, the hurried flick of a curtain, and the low, rhythmic chant of the midwife murmuring prayers under her breath. Dilruba barely cries out, more from instinct than stoicism. The harem has trained her for silence in all things, even this. She lies on a velvet-draped mattress, soaked in sweat, her fingers gripping the tassels of a pillow, her gaze fixed on the tiled ceiling above her, where a painted rose blossom seems to open and close with every contraction. And then the air shifts, a cry tiny and animal and full of defiance. A boy, a prince. The attendants exchange glances. Someone lets out a breath they hadn't realized they'd been holding. The Valid Sultan's personal physician steps forward, lifts the child, examines him quickly, then nods. Strong, she says. That one word will echo louder than any royal decree. Outside, the palace is waking. The kitchens are already preparing trays of sweets. Somewhere a eunuch is tying red silk to a doorframe. A caged bird begins to sing a coincidence, surely, and the cat with the chipped ear curls herself around the leg of a stone column and blinks slowly. Dilruba doesn't move. She just stares at the child. Her child as if afraid the moment might vanish. It won't. Not now. Historians still argue whether the birth of a male heir truly secured a concubine's safety. Some say yes, it elevated her beyond harm. Others argue it simply painted a larger target on her back. Both in their way are correct, because now everything changes. Dilruba is moved to a private suite known unofficially as the mother's wing. The bedding is new. The attendants doubled. Her food is tested before she eats it. Her slippers replaced with softer ones. Her letters written for her by a court scribe now. She never holds a pen again unless she insists. And she never leaves her child. Not for a moment. He sleeps beside her in a cradle carved from cypress and inlaid with mother of pearl. His name is not yet spoken beyond this room. That will come later at the mevlet, a formal ceremony to bless the birth and announce the prince to the court. But for now, he is just my son, Oğlum. In this moment in this room, Dilruba is not a concubine. She is not even a consort. She is a mother. And that in the harem is the closest thing to becoming immortal. The court reacts with carefully managed enthusiasm. The Grand Vizier sends a congratulatory note. The Janissaries receive a bonus ration of sweets. The city's mosques include her in the next Friday prayers. But inside the harem, the ripple is more complicated. Some offer genuine congratulations. Flowers, blessings, kind words. Others offer gifts laced in sarcasm. One concubine sends a mirror framed in gold, but cracked slightly at the corner. May you always reflect truth, the note reads. That's subtle even for here. Fringe tidbit new mothers in the harem were often gifted odd items for luck. A spoon carved from olive wood, a bag of saffron, a bowl of unpolished garnets. One legend tells of a woman gifted a tiny turtle carved from bone. It was meant to symbolize resilience, but she swore it whispered to her at night. She never slept again. Dilruba accepts everything with a smile. She does not forget. She learns now to navigate motherhood like she once navigated embroidery needles and veiled rivalries. She delegates carefully, speaks sparingly, laughs just enough, never too loudly, and she watches, always, because her son may one day be Sultan, but only if he survives. That brings you to the golden cage. It's not a metaphor. It's a real place. The cafes or cage is the section of the palace where royal princes are raised and confined. Not in cruelty, there are tutors, gardens, servants' music, but also guards isolation and an unspoken understanding that any show of ambition could be fatal. You pass through its narrow corridors, now quiet and eerie. You hear the muted sound of lessons, young voices reciting history, theology, Persian poetry. One boy is learning archery in a courtyard, so secluded that even the wind whispers softly as if afraid of being overheard. Here young princes grow in private, far from the court's temptations. It's a practice born from necessity and fear. Because in the early centuries of the empire, succession was decided not by primogeniture but by survival. Brothers turned on brothers. A new sultan meant a purge of rivals. Eventually, the cafes was introduced to contain those deadly ambitions. Dilruba knows this. She watches her son grow with love and calculation. She makes sure he learns, but not too quickly. Speaks wisely, but not too confidently. She shields him while quietly mapping out which alliances in the harem might secure his future and which might need to be pruned. Fringe fact: one prince raised in the cafes became so obsessed with parrots that he taught them to recite prayers and poetry in his voice, then listened to them argue with each other. He later became sultan, briefly. The days pass, her child flourishes. Dilruba's power becomes quiet, solid, undeniable. She no longer waits in the cushion chamber. Others now wait for her. She no longer rehearses poetry. She commissions it. And yet some nights she still wakes suddenly, listening for sounds that don't come, fearing footsteps that never arrive. Because in the palace, power is always conditional, and peace is always temporary. But tonight her son sleeps peacefully, and so does she. There's a rumor drifting through the halls of the harem like rose-scented smoke on a restless breeze. Someone drank a sherbet and never woke up. You don't hear it all at once. First it's a whisper by the fountain, then a quick glance exchanged during afternoon prayers. A eunuch tightens his grip on a serving tray. A concubine sets down her cup without sipping. Another tips hers over on purpose. There are no official proclamations in the harem. No headlines, no public scoldings. When something happens, you learn by watching who starts walking slower, and who stops appearing entirely. The woman in question, no one dares say her name was a rival, or a favorite, or perhaps simply unlucky. Her sherbet had been sweetened with rose water and dusted with ground pistachio. It was served cold as it always was. There was nothing strange about it until her silence stretched too long. The physician said natural causes, a weak heart, a sudden fever. These things happen. But the servants began boiling their own tea in private, and a young concubine burned her favorite cup, just in case. Fringe tidbit palace kitchens were required to keep a taste log where food tasters recorded which dishes were sampled and by whom. If something happened later, stomach pains, dizziness, collapse, there'd be a record. Unless, of course, the taster was also in on it. You find Dilruba sitting in her private chamber, her face unreadable. She stirs her own sherbet slowly, watching the flecks of cinnamon rise and fall like tiny edible omens. She doesn't drink it. Not yet. She knows what's happened. She knows what it means. She is now the highest-ranking woman in the harem, beneath the Valid Sultan herself. And that means something else, too. She's also the highest-value target. Historians still argue whether poison was ever officially sanctioned within palace walls. Certainly no firm records exist. But there are letters, private ones, coded recovered centuries later, that hint at corrective measures, quiet resolutions, and the swift settling of internal turbulence. You get the idea. Some claim the kitchens had a hierarchy not just of chefs, but of loyalists, those who cooked for the Sultan, those who cooked for the harem, and those who, when asked, could cook differently. The sherbet incident isn't spoken of after that week, but everyone changes how they drink. Cups are brought from home, spoons are wiped twice. One woman insists on drinking only from a specific porcelain set gifted by a now-deceased governor. Another switches to plain water entirely and claims a religious epiphany. Dilruba, though, makes no changes, at least none that others can see. She sips when she must, smiles when she should, but behind closed doors she has a taster now. A quiet girl named Sude with steady hands and a talent for recognizing the scent of almond in places it shouldn't be. Poison in the Ottoman court wasn't always lethal. Sometimes it was just inconvenient. A few hours of fever, a fainting spell, a rash that conveniently kept you from attending an important celebration, enough to delay, enough to destabilize. One woman once suffered 6 mysterious migraines, in 3 weeks missing every public appearance in that time. She reappeared pale and trembling. Her star had dimmed. She was never summoned again. Another concubine became famous for her immunity legend, had it that she ate a petal from every flower in the palace gardens to accustom her body to every possible toxin. A eunuch once saw her chewing a tulip and quietly assigned her the nickname Shakayuk the Peony. She lived to be 80. Dilruba isn't interested in tulips. She's interested in control. And that's why she visits the kitchen, not publicly, not during daylight. At night, escorted by her most trusted eunuch, she steps quietly into the heart of the palace's culinary engine. The kitchen is vast vaulted ceilings, copper pots stacked like domes of miniature mosques, spices that drift from every surface. She meets with the head cook, offers compliments, then requests that her food be prepared separately with ingredients she provides. The cook bows low. Of course, he says. He understands the message. Fringe fact. Ottoman royal kitchens were divided into over 20 separate chambers, each with its own specialty. Sherbet had its own wing, so did bread, so did rice. There was even a chamber dedicated solely to preparing dishes with eggplant. No one talked to them much. After that night, Dilruba's meals begin arriving on different trays. Always covered, always warm, always delivered by the same servant. It is understood without explanation that her food is not to be tampered with. The kitchen staff refers to her diet as the silent menu. The Valid Sultan knows, of course. She doesn't say anything, but she does begin taking tea in Dilruba's chamber once a week. They talk of poetry, of fabrics, of how the jasmine this year is blooming early. But in every word and exchange, I see you, I protect you, don't become careless. Because even now, after a prince, after elevation, after near poisonings, the game never stops. In fact, it becomes subtler, more elegant, more lethal. As you walk the harem tonight, the air feels different, softer, slower, but heavier. The canary is quiet. The cat sleeps. And somewhere in the faint echo of footsteps long since faded, you remember this is a place where even sweet sherbet can burn, and the sharpest weapons are always served cold. The hallway shivers with music, not drums or fanfare, something gentler. You follow the sound through a corridor of arched doors and silk hangings that ripple slightly as you pass. It leads you into a long room lined with low cushions, instruments propped like sleeping animals and women mid-song. Today is a celebration not official, not sanctioned, but real. One of the concubines has finally mastered a difficult piece on the ney flute. Another composed her first couplet that didn't make the poetry teacher sigh deeply. It's not much, but in the harem, small victories matter. And so they gather, not in grand robes or jewels, but comfortably in loose silks and bare feet. There is laughter here, the real kind. Someone passes around a tray of dried apricots. Someone else starts clapping a rhythm. Dilruba is seated quietly at the edge watching. Not participating, not yet. She holds her son in her arms. He's still small, wrapped in a cotton blanket patterned with tulips, and though he sleeps, one tiny hand clutches her sleeve. The women perform for each other tonight, not for the Sultan, not for the court, for themselves. One girl sings in a deep, smoky voice, words laced with longing. It's a lullaby technically, but also a confession. She is from Bosnia, and her accent paints each syllable with memory. She sings of plum trees and missing rivers of a brother left behind. The others fall silent. Then someone from Tunisia answers with a faster song, a marketplace tune complete with hand gestures and sly jokes. It's filled with innuendo and saffron and camel traders who bargain poorly. The room erupts in laughter. The harem is often described as a prison, a jewel box, a nest of snakes. But today you see it for what it also was, a chorus of women from every corner of the empire, bound not just by walls but by shared invention. They create culture in here, preserve it, remix it, survive through it. Fringe tidbit: the harem had its own musical ensembles. They played not only traditional Ottoman compositions, but also adapted foreign melodies. One Kalfa famously turned a Venetian sea shanty into a lullaby that became so popular, the Sultan once hummed it without realizing where it came from. Another quirk: foreign languages drift like perfume through this place. Turkish is spoken, of course, but also Arabic, Persian, Greek, Georgian, Berber, Circassian, Armenian. Each girl brings a fragment of the world with her, and the harem becomes a living museum of sounds. Dilruba listens more than she speaks. Her Turkish is fluent now, her Persian excellent, her Arabic poetic. But sometimes late at night she hums a lullaby in her original tongue. No one else understands it, except one, the musician. He returns tonight briefly, discreetly. Not for romance, that's over, long over. But he brings her something, a book of poems from Andalusia. She takes it with a nod. They don't speak. They don't need to. Their story has ended, but it echoes like the final notes of a song that stays in your ears long after the music stops. Historians still argue whether the harem's cultural output had lasting influence on the Ottoman Empire's arts. What's certain is this: many of the Sultan's favorite songs, poems, even architectural motifs were first shaped here in these rooms by women who never signed their names. And that anonymity, it was the price of creation. Dilruba's son stirs. She rocks him gently, and one of the younger concubines offers her a cup of honeyed tea. Not out of duty, out of something else. Respect. Maybe even affection. Because in this moment, she isn't the favored one, the feared one, the future Valid Sultan. She's just a mother listening to songs from across the empire sung by women who once shared her fears and may someday share her fate. You sit with them as the music rises again. An oud begins a gentle rhythm and two girls begin a duet. It's about a bird who cannot fly because her wings are made of paper. It's sweet, silly, sad. Someone cries, someone else laughs through tears. Fringe fact: it was common for concubines to name favorite songs after specific incidents. One popular tune was called "The Blue Slipper Fell Again," allegedly inspired by a klutzy dancer who kept tripping during a performance. The name stuck long after anyone remembered the fall. As the evening winds down, lanterns are lit. The mood shifts again, softer now. Candles reflected in polished trays cast shimmering circles across the floor. Dilruba rises to leave. Her son has fallen asleep again. As she steps out, the others watch her go, some with awe, some with envy, some with memories of their own moments, brief or lasting in the spotlight. Outside, the hallway feels cooler. You follow behind her quietly as she makes her way toward her chamber. But you pause just briefly and look back at the music room. One girl is still playing eyes closed, lost in her own melody. Another is dancing slowly, arms weaving a story only she understands. No one claps, but everyone listens. Because in the harem, even silence can sing. The flames began near the laundry wing. No one knows exactly how. Maybe a dropped oil lamp. Maybe a coal left glowing too long in a brazier. Or maybe a bit of sabotage. In the harem, accidents often arrive wearing perfume and plausible deniability. By the time someone shouted fire, it had already licked its way across 3 corridors. You're jolted awake by the sharp smell burnt silk and scorched cedar smoke tinged with cloves. The stillness that once defined the harem is gone, shattered by the chaos of slippers, slapping tile, and doors flung open in panic. The air is thick and flickering with orange. This is the Great Fire of 1665. It's not the first time Topkapi Palace has burned, and it won't be the last. But this one, it's different. It touches the harem. The eunuchs move first, fast, organized, silent. Their training shows. They herd women into the safer wings, form human chains to pass buckets of water force, open locked doors without waiting for permission. You hear one shout in a language you don't recognize and another respond in Arabic. No time for decorum now. Dilruba grabs her son, swaddling him in a blanket that smells faintly of rosewater and ink. Her hair is unbraided, her robe askew, but her eyes are clear. She knows exactly what matters right now. Get out. Keep breathing. She moves with others. Concubines, servants, teachers, all swept along by a current of urgency. No screams, just the sound of flight. The flames spread quickly, hungrily. A tapestry ignites like dry leaves. A silk curtain goes up in a whoosh. One wall tile cracks from the heat, revealing soot behind it, as if the palace remembers every fire that came before. Historians still argue how much of the harem was destroyed. Some records say a wing and a half. Others insist it was 5 courtyards. What they all agree on, the fire changed things. Because fire reveals. It shows who runs toward the smoke and who watches from a safe corridor with a measured expression. You pass one concubine standing stock, still holding only a mirror. She doesn't move. A eunuch grabs her and drags her out by the elbow, the mirror falling and shattering like a prophecy fulfilled. Fringe tidbit: after the fire, pieces of broken harem mirrors were gathered and buried in a small courtyard garden. The women claim they were too haunted to reflect again. Outside in the second courtyard of the palace, the evacuees gather. Hundreds of them, shivering, barefoot, wide-eyed. The smoke trails upward behind them like a warning. The Sultan is informed. So is the Valid. The kitchen staff starts preparing warm milk and rice. Someone produces extra robes from a storage chest, and the women wrap themselves as best they can. Dilruba sits near the garden wall, her son asleep in her lap, a patch of ash on her cheek. She says nothing. The valide arrives in a litter borne by 4 eunuchs. She's already dressed. Not rushed. She surveys the scene without blinking. Then she begins issuing orders not just for repairs, but for relocation punishment evaluation. This is not the first disaster she's overseen. It will not be the last. The next days are surreal. The women are moved temporarily into other palace wings, some into guest quarters, others into former barracks refitted with cushions and flowered screens. The hierarchy is paused unofficially. No one pretends this is normal. Repairs begin immediately. The stonework is untouched, but the silks are gone. The wooden cabinets gone. Several musical instruments charred. One parrot escapes and is never seen again. Probably somewhere in Galata shouting sherbet at unsuspecting passers-by. There's loss too. Not everyone is accounted for. One Kalfa never emerges. Her room had locked from the inside. A scarf is found near the stairs, a slipper at the edge of the fountain. No names are spoken, only prayers. Fringe fact: after the 1665 fire, the Sultan ordered a redesign of certain harem sections to include more fireproof elements. Thicker tile, better ventilation, fewer wood panels. But it's said the concubines still kept hidden braziers for tea wrapped in towels to avoid inspection. Some habits die harder than others. The fire becomes legend quickly. Within a week, stories bloom like scorched roses. One woman is said to have carried out 3 others on her back. Another allegedly threw her poetry collection out a window before escaping herself. Dilruba helps oversee the resettlement of her wing. Quietly, efficiently. The eunuchs begin asking her opinion. So does the cook. So does the tutor. So does eventually the Valide Sultan. Not because she's the loudest voice, but because in the fire she moved like someone already accustomed to power. The women begin returning to routine slowly. New curtains are hung. New bedding delivered. The scent of smoke fades but never vanishes entirely. Sometimes when the light is just right, you can see the burn mark left by a fallen oil lamp, now polished to a shimmer and called the flamestone by the girls who pass it daily. One afternoon, Dilruba walks past that spot, her son toddling at her side. He reaches for the polished tile. She gently redirects his hand. Some things should not be played with, but they should be remembered, because the harem is built on memory as much as marble. And this memory, the fire, the ash, the evacuation is now part of its fabric. A caution, a shift, a purge. And from the embers, new alliances will rise. You're surrounded by silk. Not just any silk embroidered, perfumed, layered in hues that shimmer like wet paint. Saffron, jade, indigo, crushed rose. You're in the harem tailoring hall, and today is something close to chaos. It's preparation day for the spring festival procession, a palace-wide event of parades, feasting, gifts, and veiled appearances. The concubines don't march publicly, of course, but they are seen, watched, judged, and so the harem becomes a backstage circus of fabric pins, perfume trials, and political threading. Dilruba is in the center of it now, calm, poised, and being fitted for a new robe, stitched entirely from Bursa silk and trimmed in white fox fur. Not too extravagant, nothing gaudy, just enough to whisper, "Yes, I outrank you," without saying a word. You glance around and realize this is not just fashion, it's choreography. Tailors dart between rooms, heads down, arms full of unfinished garments. One Kalfa is crying softly over a dropped box of jeweled buttons. Another is fiercely defending a neckline design with the kind of fervor usually reserved for legal trials. There's a hierarchy to the wardrobe as strict as anything in the harem, only certain colors for certain ranks. Only specific embroidery for those with a son. Only particular headscarves for those who've shared the Sultan's chamber. A girl in turquoise sashays by and is immediately intercepted. A seamstress hisses, "You haven't earned that shade." The girl turns red, then vanishes. The robe is quickly whisked away. Historians still argue whether these fashion rules were officially recorded or simply enforced through tradition. What's undeniable is their power. One misplaced hem could signify insubordination. A deliberately late accessory, a passive-aggressive declaration of war. Fringe tidbit: some concubines invented coded embroidery. Tiny symbols stitched into the lining of their robes, visible only if you knew where to look. A peacock feather might mean unbothered. A pomegranate seed, fertile and dangerous. A single red thread. I'm watching you. Dilruba's own robe carries no visible code. But her scent today is specific orange blossom with sandalwood warm, dignified just a hint of distance. She chooses her aura the way a general chooses a formation. Perfume is its own battlefield. Each concubine has a scent, and once it's claimed, no one else dares use it. The mixing rooms are full of trial vials rose with lemon jasmine, with clove musk with honey. A small dispute breaks out over a vial of violet and fig. One girl insists she had it first. Another demands to test it for herself. The vial accidentally spills. No one says a word. Dilruba smiles politely and selects none of the above, because she had hers custom mixed weeks ago. Outside, the weather is perfect, sunny but not hot. A breeze that swirls just enough to lift veils without being indecent. Ideal for dramatic entrances and carefully arranged glimpses. And so the procession begins. The harem watches from balconies. Not too close. Not too eager. They sit lounge-lean. Every position has been considered in advance. Below guards march, musicians play, and trays of sweets are passed in elaborate choreography. Somewhere the Sultan appears in gold-threaded robes. A few glance his way. Most pretend not to. Fringe fact. During processions, some concubines were assigned fans not for heat but for signaling. One flicked her fan twice during a festival and was later summoned by the Sultan. Coincidence? Everyone had opinions. Dilruba doesn't signal. She doesn't need to. Her presence is a signal. Her robe, her stillness, her calm. All of it speaks volumes. After the formalities, the harem returns to its chambers, but the day is far from over. It's time for the grand viewing, an internal event, just for the women, where everyone sees what everyone else wore. It's not about compliments, it's about memory and rankings. One girl has clearly overreached. Her pearls are too numerous, her belt too ornate. She's called for a chat with a kalfa. No one sees her again until autumn. Another girl, subtle and elegant, receives a folded handkerchief on her pillow that night, embroidered with a new proverb, "Modesty sharpens the sword." Everyone knows who sent it. Dilruba receives no messages. She doesn't need them. Her robe is carefully hung, her perfume flacon sealed and locked away. She lounges for a moment, barefoot, her son at play nearby with the silk ball embroidered with miniature tulips. The festival was a success, but more than that, it was a reminder that even in stillness, even in softness, even in the rustle of fabric and the swirl of scent, power is always present, always performed, always watching. The tailors return the next day to collect the unused silks. One piece is missing, a swatch of violet damask. No one asks. No one ever does. But a week later, a new curtain appears in Dilruba's chamber. Violet soft, barely scented with sandalwood. And on its hem stitched so faintly it could be a whisper. Beauty that bows is still a crown. You are not the only one watching. Far across the courtyard, behind a gilded meshrabia screen, a pair of foreign eyes squint through the lattice. The visitor, a European diplomat, or perhaps his secretary, adjusts his silk cravat awkwardly and leans forward with poorly concealed fascination. He's been granted a glimpse of the palace grounds. Not the harem, of course, never directly, but enough to make assumptions. And oh, how the West loved to assume. Tonight's section, if you haven't noticed, is sponsored by Misunderstanding. You've entered the world of outsider accounts, a dizzying mix of travelogues, letters home, crude sketches, scandalous whispers, and men named things like Sir Reginald Featherbottom, who had all the wrong ideas and none of the right vocabulary. Historians still argue whether these foreign observers ever got close to the harem. Most didn't, but that didn't stop them from writing entire volumes about it. They described captive houris, perfumed dens of debauchery, and oriental spectacles of indolence. One Dutch envoy claimed the women of the harem bathed in milk. Another swore he saw a eunuch throw a French spy from the palace walls using only one arm in an insult. None of that happened, but it made for excellent reading. Fringe tidbit: One Venetian ambassador described the harem as a university of seduction, where wit and perfume are equal tools of conquest. That line became so popular in Europe it was reprinted in a Parisian perfume advertisement 2 centuries later. In reality, these men rarely saw more than a shadow through a screen. Maybe a silhouette, maybe a flash of embroidered slipper. But they constructed whole fantasies around those fragments. The harem in their minds wasn't a complex institution full of languages, education, political maneuvering, and maternal hierarchy. It was theater with too much eyeliner. And the women, they were props. Draped across divans, sipping sweet wine, longing to be rescued by pale, bewigged adventurers who couldn't tell Turkish from Arabic. But back inside the palace, the women knew. They knew they were being imagined, painted in oils by men who had never seen their faces. Described in letters as dusky gazelles. Gazelles, please. Have you ever met a harem woman? A gazelle would not last 5 minutes. Dilruba, for her part, doesn't care. She's heard the whispers. One of the eunuchs occasionally passes on translations of foreign letters filtered through sarcasm. She once read aloud an excerpt to her chambermaid that described the harem as a temple of idleness. They both laughed so hard that sherbet came out of someone's nose. She knows the truth, that the harem is less a fantasy and more an empire within an empire. A place run by rules so complex the outside world wouldn't recognize them, even if printed in gold. Still, the outside curiosity persists. A French painter is granted a brief audience, not with the concubines, but with a former usta, who now oversees wardrobe. He sketches fabrics, room layouts, a bowl of fruit. He returns home and paints a scene featuring 9 nearly naked women, reclining in impossible postures on an improbably oversized sofa. One of them is holding a peacock. There are no peacocks in the harem, at least not live ones. Fringe fact: in the 18th century, a British travel writer claimed he smuggled himself into the harem by dressing as a laundress. Scholars agree this did not happen, mostly because the laundry was handled exclusively by eunuchs, and also because the same writer once claimed to have dined with the ghost of Cleopatra. What these men fail to grasp, what they could not possibly understand, is that the harem was less about seduction and more about survival. Not a velvet dream, but a chessboard of wit, timing, and patience. Dilruba understands that. She performs, yes, but not for diplomats, not for scandalous books or curious foreigners. She performs for legacy, for her son, for the knowledge that every embroidered robe, every perfectly timed gesture, every silence builds a future. She will not be present to rule, but will absolutely shape. The harem occasionally feeds the fantasies. A glimpse here, a rumor there. A piece of perfumed stationery accidentally left near a visiting servant. A song heard faintly on the wind. But the truth? It's quieter, heavier, and far more powerful. The harem doesn't exist to be understood by outsiders. It exists to outlast them. She never smiled in portraits. Kosem Sultan's painted likeness tucked away behind a veiled screen in the harem's private archive shows a woman dressed in velvet and pearls. Her gaze directs her lips a whisper away from saying something terrifying. She was once like Dilruba, a concubine with no title, no allies, no name anyone remembered. And then she became the most powerful woman in Ottoman history. You've stepped into her shadow now. Kosem's legacy still clings to the walls of the harem like jasmine in summer, sweet, subtle, inescapable. Even now, decades after her death, the eunuchs speak her name in lowered tones. The concubine tells stories of her rise, her cunning, her careful way of folding letters, and her fall, because power in the harem never arrives without a matching set of enemies. Kosem Sultan began as a Greek girl sold into slavery, renamed and retrained in the heart of the harem. She learned quickly, she adapted faster, she bore sons. And when one of those sons became sultan, she became Valid Sultan, the queen mother, and then something more. She ruled in place of the sultan during his absences, or more often his inexperience. Historians still argue whether Kosem ruled through love manipulation or sheer intellect. The truth is probably all three. She appointed grand viziers, arranged marriages, controlled the palace treasury, and once orchestrated the exile of a rival simply by changing the seating arrangement at a dinner party. Fringe tidbit, it said she had a hidden staircase built between her chambers and those of the viziers, allowing her to issue commands without ever being seen. No documentation survives, which of course makes the story even more believable. Dilruba walks past a tapestry of Kosem each morning now. Not because she wants to, because it's unavoidable, and because in quiet moments she wonders if she's following the same path. Her son grows stronger every day, more observant, more serious. He reads aloud to her now not just poems, but state reports brought in by trusted eunuchs. He doesn't know it yet, but he is being groomed, not just by tutors, but by his mother's silence. Her gestures, her selections of who enters and who waits. And Dilruba, she begins writing, not for public record, not yet, but letters, memos, lists, thoughts scribbled onto parchment and tucked into a lacquered box shaped like a tulip. She has opinions now about who governs what, about taxes, about the appointment of governors to distant provinces, about a certain vizier who's been ordering too much ink and not enough rice. She says none of this aloud, but somehow the rice problem is corrected. She is becoming more than the mother of a prince. She is becoming a presence, and some don't like it. There are rumors, again, that she's too ambitious, that she meets with advisors at dusk, that she burns letters in a brazier shaped like a lion. None of it is proven. All of it is true. The parallels to Kosem become too clear to ignore. Kosem was adored by the people. She gave charity in secret. She paid the dowries of orphaned girls. She built mosques and schools. She also allegedly had a rival drowned in the palace cistern. Fringe fact, the harem had an unofficial book of warnings, a handwritten volume updated over the years with stories of what not to do. It included entries like, never accept the second cup, don't trust a eunuch who sings, and the girl with the fan always knows. Dilruba reads it, quietly, covers it in silk, adds her own note. If they remember you, they will either follow you or fear you. Kosem's end was brutal, strangled in her own chambers by order of her daughter-in-law, Turhan Sultan, who took her place. The official story says she passed peacefully, but the harem knows. They always know. And Dilruba, she watches Turhan's portrait too, not with fear, with curiosity, because one day someone may walk past her likeness and whisper stories half true, half invented, entirely powerful. The harem does not preserve truth. It preserves influence. And if Dilruba survives long enough, if she plays every note as carefully as Kosem once did, then she too might become a name that echoes through rose-scented halls, long after her body has become shadow. But not yet. Tonight she tucks her son into bed, kisses his brow, and lights a single candle beside his copy of the Book of Kings. She whispers a story about wisdom and lions and rivers that forget nothing. And then she returns to her chamber where a sealed scroll awaits. From the Valide Sultan. 2 words. Begin preparing, the letter is burned before dawn. Not because it held scandal, just clarity. And in the harem, clarity is as dangerous as seduction. You don't know what exactly the Valid Sultan meant by begin preparing. No one does. It's not a threat. It's not an invitation. It's a key slipped beneath the door without instructions. But Dilruba understands. She always does. So she begins. First, she sends her son to a different tutor. The old one kindly and slow recited too many Sufi parables and not enough statecraft. The new one is sharper, less poetic, more dangerous, perfect. Second, she has her chamber curtains replaced not because they're worn, but because they have become familiar. Familiarity is vulnerability. She selects heavier fabric, darker patterns, less translucence. A room that watches without being seen. Third, she starts sleeping in a different bed every 3 nights. Fringe fact: this was a real practice adopted by at least 2 Valide sultans. One even had 4 beds arranged identically in different chambers to confuse potential assassins. The pillows were scented differently, so she always knew where she was, even in the dark. Because, yes, even here, especially here, assassination is part of the game. You've probably guessed by now Dilruba is being prepared for a transition. Not just upward, forward. Because the Valide Sultan is dying. It's not said aloud. No one dares. But the signs are there. Her visits are shorter, her voice quieter. She walks with a staff now. Her scent has changed no longer. Rose and clove, but something drier. Cypress, cedar. The palace adjusts to this knowledge in the way that only palaces can, by pretending it doesn't exist, while preparing obsessively behind the scenes. The eunuchs begin shifting allegiances. The older ones remain loyal to the Valide. The younger ones, well, some start to linger longer in Dilruba's hallways. One begins to refer to her very softly as the mother of the future. She does not correct him, but she also doesn't smile, because the last steps are always the most dangerous. And the harem remembers Kosum. Historians still argue whether Turan Sultan acted out of fear or ambition when she ordered Kosum's death. But the method, strangulation with a curtain cord, remains a grisly watermark in the story of the harem. A soft death. A silent one. A message. Now there are whispers again. The corridors hold their breath. Girls walk faster. Servants speak more quietly. Something is about to happen. And then it does. The Valide Sultan dies in her sleep. No ceremony, no final decree, just silence, like the final breath of a candle. The palace does not mourn in public. There is no funeral procession, no national holiday. She is buried quickly, respectfully, with only the innermost circle present. But within the harem, the tectonic plates shift, because there is now a vacancy, and only one woman has the experience, the alliances, the proven cunning. Dilruba. The morning after the death, she wakes early. Not because she must, but because she's ready. She is bathed in water scented with myrrh and saffron. Her hair is braided into a crown. Her robe today is not embroidered, not gilded. It is plain white silk, the color of both mourning and rebirth. She does not walk to the Valide's chamber. She is summoned. 2 eunuchs await. They bow. They say nothing. They lead her down the long hallway that she has passed 1,000 times each step, now echoing differently. The harem is silent, not with fear, with certainty. She passes rooms once filled with laughter, music, poetry. Now they are still, watching. And then finally she enters the chamber of the Queen Mother. It is exactly as she remembers. The same carved ceiling. The same painted birds on the wall. The same incense burner carved like a tulip. But now it is hers. She does not weep. She does not sit immediately. First she walks the room, one full circle, and then finally she takes her seat. The Valide's seat. Fringe tidbit. The first decision of a new Valid Sultan was often symbolic. One banned honey in the baths. Another reintroduced a lost poem to the school curriculum. A third had every slipper in the palace replaced. Dilruba, she issues no orders. Not yet. She waits. Because she knows the most powerful silence is the one just before the world begins to obey. That evening a small procession arrives. Eunuchs, concubines, teachers, attendants. They kneel, one by one, offering respect. They do not say her name. They say Valide. And in that moment, Dilruba is no longer someone's daughter, or consort or mother. She is the center, the sun, the new echo. The harem has changed hands, but it has not changed nature. The air doesn't feel different. That's the strange thing. You'd expect a storm, a shiver, something to mark the end of an era. But no, the corridors look the same. The lanterns glow the same, and the peacocks in the outer garden still shriek at inopportune moments. But the harem knows. The harem always knows. Dilruba is now Valide Sultan. She speaks softly as she always has. Issues few direct orders as she always did. But now her whispers ripple through walls. Her lifted eyebrow causes schedules to rearrange. Her absence in a room speaks louder than another woman's shouting presence. She is not Kosem. She does not need to be, but she has learned from her. Her first act is subtle. She reassigns 3 eunuchs quietly without cause, without conversation. The message is clear. She remembers everything, even what happened before she held power. She visits her son's chamber daily now. Not long, just enough time to hear his lessons, correct his posture, remind him that while he may one day sit on the throne, it is she who built the staircase. Outside the harem, the court buzzes. Rumors flare, flicker, and fade again. Ministers speculate. Governors send more frequent letters. A vizier sends a gift, an antique astrolabe, hoping to flatter. It arrives with a note to the guiding star of the palace. She sends back a fruit basket, with no note. Fringe fact, many Valide sultans received diplomatic gifts, meant to curry favor: silks, rare animals, musical instruments, miniature paintings. One received a lion cub. She sent it to the janissaries with a polite instruction: train it to recognize those who lie. Dilruba's focus, however, remains inward. She expands the school within the harem, adds philosophy, adds astronomy, adds a weekly debate. A girl from Syria argues with a girl from Albania about fate and free will while holding a bowl of raisins. Dilruba listens from behind a screen, smiles. She begins writing letters, not to lovers or rivals or gossip couriers, but to governors, to mosque elders, to women's charities. Some are signed, some are not. All of them have impact. One day, a new library is built near the old garden. It houses only works written by women. No announcement is made. But by week's end, a group of young concubines has already memorized the poetry on the 3rd shelf. Dilruba attends prayers more publicly now, not ostentatiously, just visible enough. A reminder she is pious, she is present, she is permanent. But power, like perfume, needs constant tending, and not everyone is pleased. A former favorite, once elevated, now aging, asks for an audience. She is granted one. She enters the chamber with practiced grace and too much rose oil. She weeps. Reminds Dilruba of past kindnesses. Suggests a promotion. Perhaps even a villa outside the palace. Dilruba nods, listens, offers a dried fig, then pauses, and says, "You have mistaken memory for leverage." The woman is not seen again in the palace, but she does receive a villa, far away. Because Dilruba does not punish, she redirects. Fringe tidbit: one Valid Sultan was said to have kept a private garden where she assigned rivals to tend to rare orchids. Over time, they grew expert in floral diplomacy. Whether true or not, the phrase assigned to the orchids became shorthand for polite exile. And yet, for all her mastery, Dilruba remains aware of the tides outside. Whispers of reform drift in from Europe. The Sultan's council debates modernization. There are calls for military restructuring. Even the janissaries are restless. She hears all of it and prepares, because harem politics are no longer confined to pillows and poetry. The empire is changing, slowly, reluctantly, and she intends to shape that change before it swallows the palace whole. She begins meeting with her son weekly, not as mother and child, but as 2 architects of legacy. They speak of tax policy, of border uprisings, of drought and grain. She recommends a new vizier. He listens. One day he asks her, "Will history remember me?" She replies, "Only if I allow it to." She's not being cruel, just truthful. She spends more time alone now, writes more, prays more, keeps fewer attendants. She trims the palace not just of expense, but of noise. She creates quiet corridors. She removes a fountain that gurgled too loudly. She wants space to think, because she's seen what happens when valid sultans cling too long. She's seen what happens when they don't prepare the world for their absence. And so she begins writing a guide, not a diary, not a confession, a plan for what must happen after her final whisper, not for her glory, for the harem's survival, and perhaps its evolution. Because she's not just the last word of the old harem. She might be the first syllable of something new. The corridors feel softer now. Not in decoration, those remain the same. The same tulip tiles, the same polished marble, the same archways that curve like the spine of a story long told. No, what's softer is the atmosphere. The edges have rounded. The hush is warmer. The echo of ambition, once sharp and bright as sunlight on steel, now falls more like candlelight on parchment. Dilruba moves slowly these days, not from weakness but from choice. Her slippers are quieter than ever, her robes simpler. Her presence stills rooms with the same power it once used to stir them. She speaks less, listens more, answers only when necessary, and yet every decision still passes through her. She no longer walks the gardens each morning. Instead, she sits near the fountain beneath the myrtle tree where the birds gather and the cat yes, the same one somehow still naps on sun-warmed tile. The canary has long stopped screeching figs, but another one now chirps hush with unnerving accuracy. Her son is Sultan now in every way. He presides over councils, reviews the army, expands the palace library. His portrait hangs in state halls across the empire. But once a week without fail, he still visits her at dusk. He enters without ceremony, sits on the cushion to her left. She asks how he is. He always lies, but sweetly. She doesn't call him on it anymore. He pours the coffee now, and she lets him. Fringe tidbits, some Valide sultans kept secret journals of these visits written, not in prose, but in coded recipes. One spoon of honey meant a peaceful council. Too much salt meant a betrayal. Burned rice meant the sultan cried. No one knows if Dilruba did the same, but her recipe box was kept under lock and key. The younger concubines now watch her with reverence. Some call her the quiet storm. Others just call her mother. Most have never seen her raise her voice, but they've seen her change the course of a life with a raised eyebrow. She teaches now formally and not. She selects a group of 5 each year. Not the prettiest, not the cleverest, the most observant. She instructs them in history and subtlety, in the art of control through absence. Let them come to you, she says, but let them think it was their idea. She tells them stories about music, about politics, about a boy who once wrote poetry and vanished before he could become dangerous, about a curtain cord that once whispered death, about a robe that saved a life just by being worn at the right time. She does not tell them everything. Some lessons must arrive the way the harem itself always did, slowly, softly under silk. Outside, the empire changes. New provinces rise. New enemies form. Printing presses multiply. Letters arrive from Vienna and Paris and Delhi, written in delicate flourishes addressing her with titles she never asked for. Mother of strategy? Architect of the interior court? The veiled vizier. She signs her replies with a single character, a tulip. She begins rising before dawn, not to govern, to remember. She walks the empty halls before anyone else stirs. She touches the tiled walls. She listens to the echoes of her own footsteps. She pauses outside the old bathhouse. The steam is gone now, the girls too. But the memory clings to the tiles faintly like perfume in winter. Historians still argue whether the harem faded naturally or was dismantled by force. But those who lived it, those like Dilruba, know that it didn't end. It evolved. What was once hidden became discreet. What was once forbidden became formalized. What was once power in silk became legacy. And one day she simply does not rise. There is no great drama, no shouting, just the gentle hush of courtiers removing their slippers, the quiet sob of a young girl who had just learned her first proverb, the flutter of pigeons outside her window. She is laid to rest in the family mausoleum. No portrait, no statue, but in the harem for generations after women sit in the same courtyard, where she once sipped sherbet and say, she taught without speaking, she ruled without needing to be seen. She was the last of the first. And maybe, just maybe, a new girl arrives foreign, wide-eyed, humming a melody from a far-off place. She will not know Dilruba's name, but she will feel her, in the silence, in the structure, in the way the curtains sway, in the way her future is shaped by hands she never saw. Because some echoes do not fade. They build, they become, they endure. And now, as the final candles in the harem gutter low, and the halls stretch quiet into sleep, you rest beside these tiled walls with their cracked blossoms and centuries-old whispers. Outside, the cypress trees sway gently in the moonlight, casting long shadows across the gravel path where women once walked in silence, in ambition, in hope. The gardens no longer echo with laughter or song or scandalous secrets wrapped in rose petals, but if you listen closely, truly closely, you can almost hear it all just beneath the hush. The shuffle of slippers, the clink of a coffee spoon, the rustle of silk robes brushing a hallway. It's all still here, soft, still, settled. You close your eyes now, with the weight of 1,000 stories humming gently in your chest. Not heavy, just warm. Just present. These were not myths, not fantasies. These were lives complex, clever, and utterly real. And as sleep drapes over you like the finest bursa silk, remember that history isn't always loud. It isn't always carved in stone. Sometimes it lives behind a veil, in the hush of a garden, in the crease of a letter burned before morning, in the scent of sandalwood where no one is left to wear it. So rest now, traveler. The harem is quiet, the lanterns dim, and I'll be here with another story for you tomorrow night.